My name is Charles Harrum. I'm in Cumberland, Maryland, speaking to Mr. Harry Foreback about his World War II experiences. Today is August 9th, 2007. Thank you for having me, Mr. Foreback. For the record, Mr. Foreback, would you state your full name?
My full name is Harry Julius Foreback,
What is your current address?
1424 Dogwood Court, Cumberland, Maryland.
Where were you born?
In Orleans, Crossroads, West Virginia, about 45 miles east of where I live today.
And when were you born?
February the 21st, 1927.
What branch of service were you in?
I was in the Army.
And were you enlisted or drafted?
I was drafted.
Were you drafted on June 12th, 1945?
Yes, that's when I went into the service. Of course, previous to that, I went to be examined before I was took into the service.
And were you discharged in October of 46?
I was, yes.
What was your highest rank?
Private.
And can you tell me the company you were attached to?
I was attached overseas, was in the 25th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squad. It was a new formed organization at that time in 1945. It was more or less formed for policing of your civilians, the Germans, and so forth.
Were you in any World War II campaigns?
No, I was not.
Were you in the military occupation of Germany then?
I was. The full time I was over there.
What major city were you established or stationed at?
Well, when I left the States, I arrived in Le Havre, France. I went by train then into Regansburg. We stationed there a while and stationed at different points out where our platoon would go stay in one place maybe 30 days. We were stationed in Vilvock, I believe the name, Dinglefing. Even there was one place we stayed for a while was Foreback, and that reminded me of my own name, only they spelt it different. And then we came back to Regensburg and Nuremberg. I was at Nuremberg a while, but just different places here and there. And of course, as of now, I forget some of the names of places.
But it was usually for a 1 month stay?
About half of it was 1 month stay. And then our headquarters was stationed one place, and we'd have 2 or 3 platoons would be stationed out from that.
And you were Company B?
I was a Company B, but I was in the 3rd platoon. And there was 3 platoons and then headquarters.
I'd like to jump back before the war and try to see what you can tell me about the Great Depression. Do you recall any of the Great Depression?
I recall some of it, yes. Of course, I was born and raised in the country. And, of course, automobiles was very few and far between. Of course, I lived close to the railroad, and previous to the Depression, my father, he worked on the railroad. And for about 3 years, he maybe worked 1 or 2 days. But I remember us. Of course, we'd all get together and so forth, but all of our food and everything was raised, and we raised a couple hogs and so forth to stay alive.
Living in the countryside. What was your dad's name?
My dad was Harry Kenneth Foreback. And, of course, my mother, which is still living today, is 97 years old. She canned everything, and what I mean, the washing machines, you done it on what they call the washboard and so forth. Of course, it wasn't city living, but we had a good life in one sense of the word.
Did you have electricity in the house?
We did not have electricity. And of course everything, it would mean perishable stuff, well, they tried to keep it in what we called a spring. The water would run, set it in the water, and the water would keep running through it to keep it cold.
Did you have running water in the house?
No, we did not.
How often did you all bathe without water in the house?
Well, we would bathe almost every day. Of course, now in the wintertime we didn't, but in the summer we bathed every day because we had a big spring and good clean water, and we would set the water out in the sun in the summertime in the wash tub, and we would take a bath in the wash tub.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Dolores.
Was your parents from Morgan County?
My mother was. She was born and raised at Orleans. But my father, he was raised partially up in Jerome, Pennsylvania. And then he migrated down there when they was building a road into Orleans, and he got acquainted with my mother.
Were they married before World War One?
I don't think so. No, they wasn't married because they should have been married around 1926, 27.
Was your father too young for First War?
I don't know. I know he never was into service.
Were you the first child?
I was the first child.
How many other brothers and sisters did you have?
I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. And luckily, we have 1 sister and 1 brother still living yet. I lost my 1 sister.
Were you all born close to age, the same age? All within a few years, or were you spread out?
I think at the rate, my age and my youngest brother is about 11 or maybe 12 years apart.
During the Great Depression, you would be really young when it was real bad in the beginning. Did your father lose a lot of his work?
What was that again?
Did your father lose his job during the Great Depression?
Yes, he did. He worked on the railroad, and he didn't have no work. But of course, what he did, though, I remember when I was just small, he would hew cross ties for a fella, and they sold the cross ties at that time. Of course, I thought it was a lot of money, but later on I found out it was back then. But he sold the cross ties for 90 cents. And of course, he would give my dad a nickel for making a cross tie with a broadaxe.
Wow.
And if you don't know what a broadaxe is, you don't want to.
Did you get a job during the Great Depression?
No, I wasn't old enough to get a job during the Great Depression.
Did you attend school?
Yes, I did. I attended school. We had a 1-room school. And at that time, I would say it was close to 55 students with 1 teacher, and you had to grade 1 to the 8th.
Did you have any one specific teacher you liked?
Well, I had 1 specific teacher for 6 years. And yes, I liked him. Of course, I was always had been living close to the railroad and a telegraph office there. I would go over and I could use the Morse code. If anyone knows what the Morse code is. And this teacher, he was learning to be a telegraph operator, and he was going to go to work for the railroad. and we would give signals with the dots and dashes the last year of school with him. I never will forget that.
What was his name?
His name was Cecil Parlett. And of course, they'd ask questions in school. I never will forget this. He said, what would you want to be when you're old enough to go to work? What kind of a job you want? And I stated, I want to be a locomotive engineer. And that was one thing that he'd always tell me after I went to work. Of course, he went to work as an operator on the railroad, and I went to work when I was 18 on the railroad as a fireman. He says, you're the only student I ever had that done what they wanted to do. And I'm really proud that I did finish up on the railroad.
Did you continue talking to this guy throughout his career?
Yeah. Of course, he went to work on the railroad, and I'd go by and see him, and every once in a while talk to him. Yeah.
Were you an outdoor type of kid or an indoor kid?
No, I was more of an outdoor because of course, during the Depression, lots of times we would kill rabbits or wild rabbits and so forth, and I used to tramp a little when I was a kid, and yeah, I was outside. Of course, always liked to hunt. In fact, I've done it up until about 3 years ago. I always deer hunted, but now I don't hunt anymore. I go down to camp where they're at and feed them once in a while. But
can you tell me about your best friend growing up?
well, actually, I can't say that I had any one best friend. Of course, where I lived, there wasn't too many people or younger people. I done majority of my fooling around on the railroad and talked to railroad people.
Was your family a political type of family? Did they talk about politics in it?
No, they didn't talk about politics too much. Of course, they were Republicans, and I know one thing. My mother, she wanted to try to get some help back during the Depression, and I do remember this very well. She had a group from Berkeley Springs come over, and they was giving them helping with them, giving them sugar and salt and so forth. So my mother, she said that he asked them for some salt and pepper and sugar or something like that. She didn't need any other things. So they came there that day, and we always had a big cellar, and it was full of different things. And of course, my mother, she thought, well, she'd show them that what we was doing and trying to show that we wasn't trying to beg. And the woman said to her, the man rather, said to her, said, well, lady, he says, we have been places they don't even have a can of bean. Said, you've got all kinds of stuff here. She said, well, I'd like to have a little salt or sugar. She never got a thing. So I've always remembered that because and my mother, she would can regardless. Maybe sometimes she'd have maybe 20 or 30 cans of something, and she had 2 or 3 cans that she could do. She'd can them because she.
Did they ever talk about Franklin Roosevelt and what he was doing during the Great Depression?
No. I can't say that I remember him talking anything about that.
Did you all have a radio in your house?
We didn't have a radio in our house for a long time because we didn't have no electric. And actually, we did get one years later. What I mean, I guess I was about the 6th or 7th grade, no, the 6th grade, because, and then you would have a battery, and you'd have to try get the battery charged, and what I mean, by the time you thought that something was coming on, the battery would go dead on you.
Did you all have a car?
No, oh my, no.
How did your father get around?
Well, we walk or ride train. Of course, that was one thing. We got plenty of trains. They stopped at our place. There was 3 trains stopped there daily. Then finally they cut one of them off, and there was 2 a day.
Even out in the country?
Oh yeah, they had a station there, and the railroad run right through there. Our area.
Did you get to travel a lot then as a kid?
No, I didn't. Of course, I would, every once in a while, I'd go to Hancock, maybe to the dentist or something. You get on the train and go down to Hancock, West Virginia, and you'd cross the river and go to the dentist, and then go back and catch a train back home that evening.
Did you ever do anything that you shouldn't have done as a kid that you look back and say I was kind of stupid?
Well, truthfully, no. I never really, anything that I didn't, you mean something that was right ornery. I guess I've done some ornery things, but I don't think it was too much. Just like I went to school 2 years, I rode a train from Orleans to Great Capen to school. Get down of a morning on the train, and I'd get on the train at 7:15 in the morning, go to Great Capen about 7:30, 7:35, something like that. Go to school, and that evening at 4:30 I'd catch the train and come back home. Because my dad, they'd give him a pass and we could ride the train free.
Oh. How far was the train ride in that case?
It was just a little over 6 miles.
The Great Depression at times gets real bad and then gets better and then bad again. And Franklin Roosevelt comes up with lots of neat little programs to try to get people to work one way or the other. WPA, CCC, NRA. Do you recall any of those programs?
CC camp was the only one I can recall, because there was, I would say 3 or 4 people from there that was in the CC camp. But of course our area, what I mean, right in there at that time, well, there was only kids and all of us, there wasn't over 55 of us in Orleans. Of course, we had a little post office there, and of course then they had a little store, and the groceries and stuff would be shipped in there on rail, and they'd stop and unload it and so forth.
Did your dad own the house he lived in?
In later years, yes.
How about during the Depression?
No.
Did you move often?
No, I can't say we moved often. I can only remember of moving 3 times until my dad, later years, he bought a place. But about three times about all we moved.
When you were a kid, was there any one person who seemed to be your hero?
No, I can't say that there was, no.
Were you a dog or a cat person with pets?
Oh, I always had a dog, and of course, if you were speaking of being outdoors, I like to coon hunt. And several of us kids, we'd Each had a dog and would go coon hunting.
What was your first job?
My first job was hoeing corn.
This was before the war?
Oh yes, I was on the, well, I guess, let's see, I was only about 13 or 14 years old. Father gave me a quarter for hoeing the weeds out of a cornfield. And it took me about better than a day to do it. But that quarter was the big one. But then, after that, why, there was an old gentleman that he had a sawmill, he cut timber. And of course I was a good sized boy for my age, and he stopped and wanted to know if I would go to work for him. This is in the summertime, but it was in 1942, I guess. Yeah. Anyhow, I went to work for him on sawmill. We cut timber and sawed it on the mill and drug it in with the horses. Not horses, he had 2 mules. I worked for him that summer. Went to school then, and the next year I farmed for a lady. I had bought a horse myself and used a horse with her horse. She had one that was lame, and went to work for her and worked the whole summer for her.
Driving a team?
Yeah, cutting, farming, plow corn, planting, all this. Then the next year I went to work on the railroad on the track.
This was during the wartime.
Yeah. It was about 2 years before I went in the service, I guess. Of course, it's a little bit hard to figure time, but anyhow, I worked the summer there, and in March of 1945, or November of 1944, I got a job on the railroad and to become a fireman, and they didn't have a draft cart and they wouldn't let me go to work. So when I was 18 years old, the boss come to the house. Of course, I hunted with him when I was a kid, and he said, "I want you to go to work." And of course, he sat down at our breakfast table and ate breakfast, and looked over at my mother. He says, "I'll get him deferred." He said, "He won't have to go in the army if he goes to work on the railroad." Well, of course, she almost shoved me out. But anyhow, that's when I went to work then in March of 1945 on the railroad.
I would like to jump back a little bit earlier, though. Did you know anything about what was happening in Europe before the war with the Nazis and the fascists?
No, truthfully, don't remember too much.
How about the Japanese over across the Pacific? Did you hear about what they were doing in China?
No, not really that I could remember. What I mean, there may have been something, but I don't really remember.
Do you remember how you found out about Pearl Harbor?
No, I don't. I don't remember how I did, but I can plainly remember when the war was over.
When the war came to end in Europe?
Well, yeah, when the war was over in Europe, of course, I went to work on the railroad, and of course, this might sound silly to some people, but I was working a coal train out of Kaiser, West Virginia, to go to Cumbo, and we were sitting down on the cutoff, and the brakeman was on the telephone, and he come back, he said, "The war's over in Germany." I'll never forget that, but we were sitting there on the old steam engine.
What was your reaction?
Well, of course, I was glad to, I knowed some of the boys that been in. I knowed a couple of them that was killed during the service close by where we lived, and I was really glad that it was over. And of course, then when I had to go then in June, when I had to go into service myself, why, I I went to Fort Riley, Kansas.
Before we get to that, I'd like to talk about life during the war. I teach that there was rationing. Do you recall any of that?
Yes, I recall that. And
What was rationed?
rationing, you could only get so much of different things. Just like you could get 3 pounds of sugar or different things. I forget now totally what it was, but just for example, gasoline. Of course, there was a few automobiles around in which we didn't bother, but you got 3 gallons of gas if you drove your vehicle to work, and just about anything that you bought. Then, when in the shoe line, you had to get a coupon to buy a pair of shoes, and of course, right off the top of my head, I don't recall of all of the things. Coffee was one. You can only get so much coffee in a length of time.
I also know that there were scrap drives where they picked up different types of metal scrap and tires to turn in. Did you participate in any of that?
Yes, we'd gather up different scrap and so forth, and they'd pick it up. I think we got about 3 cents a pound for it, something like that.
Where did you have to take it to get it picked up?
Well, there was a fella that had an old truck that would come around, and of course he'd guess the weight of it and so forth, but he'd pick it up and take it to the well, that all went to Hancock, and they loaded it on a gondola and shipped it out of there on the Western Maryland Railroad.
Were you ever a Boy Scout?
No.
Did you ever get into playing sports of any sort?
Never did. Nothing. Sport line. Because that was one thing I couldn't, when I was going the 7th and 8th grade, going to school, I couldn't participate because I had to catch the train home. And then if anything that went on, I either had to stay over or walk home. When you walk 6 miles after night, you didn't do that too often.
Do you recall the day that President FDR died, Franklin Roosevelt died?
No, I don't.
Don't remember that. So your vivid memory was the war being over in Europe, and then the next month, you're enlisted.
The next month I was in.
Did that sound to you kind of weird?
No, I know that we was going to have to whip the Japanese. But I mean, of course, then I was out and I read the newspaper and was heard more on the radio than I did when I was home, because we just didn't have it there. And the only way that we would get a newspaper is someone come by on the train and tell us off one.
When you had started working for the railroad, did you move out of your dad and mom's house?
No, I never did. But, of course, what I did, I had to go to Brunswick, Maryland to work. And, of course, I'd go back and forth home, get on the train, go home, and so forth. But I had a room down there. And, of course, lots of times my mother said, I'm a good laundry lady, said you bring your clothes home, don't get washed. So, but I really didn't. I never could say that I left home until I got married.
When you were living there at home / in Brunswick at the room, especially at the room, where did you get your meals?
Well, we go to the YMCA. They had a restaurant there, and it was open 24 hours a day. And of course, then several years later, we started an apartment. There was 8 of us, and we had an apartment. Each one of us would have our own bed, and maybe there'd be 2 or 3 of us in one room. and we had a setting room.
This is after the war, right?
Yeah, and then we had a kitchen there that we could cook and so forth.
When you went to the restaurant that was open up 24 hours a day, was it a automat or was it a sit-down restaurant?
Oh, it was a sit-down restaurant, yeah, and they had, you could get your meals regular, and of course the menu was basically the same, but you could get a full-course meal, and so,
You did a lot of eating out then.
I didn't, well, before I went in the service, I done all my eating out because I knew they wasn't gonna be around too long. Of course, I could have, when I was drafted, the draft board said, well, your boss wants you to be deferred. I said, don't pay no attention to that, because here I am, 18 years old. I says, and two of the fellows that went with me to be examined, this was after I was examined the first time, he said, two of them, I said, he's got little kids, less than 5 years old. I said, I'd rather one of them stay home. And that's one reason I never even, and of course when I come back from the service, my boss, he was still working yet then. He said, damn your hide. He said, I went to all that to get you deferred and you wouldn't. I said, I didn't want it, and I didn't. But I mean, because I feel that I should be there over someone that's got a family.
So you decided to get drafted?
I decided that I wouldn't take no parts of a deferment. That's what I decided.
You weren't looking to get into the fight necessarily.
No, well, of course at that time I was looking to get into the fight with the Japanese because the war wasn't over there. But what I'm getting at, I still think that I'd rather do it than have one of the others that had a family. Of course, I had a family, but I didn't have no kids of my own or anything like that.
Were you leaving a girl behind when you went?
What was that?
Were you leaving a girl behind?
No, I wasn't. I wouldn't have gone with nobody or anything like that.
So you're off to war. It's June 1945. Where'd they send you?
What was that?
Where did they send you to get trained?
Well, they sent me, I went to Huntington, West Virginia. And then they sent me to out in Ohio. I can't recall the place we went, but anyhow, they decided out there where I was going. And they told me I was going to be shipped out to Fort Riley, Kansas. Going out there for my basic training.
What was it? What did it feel like to be way out there in the middle of Kansas, 10 times further than you've ever been before?
Well,
you have any recollections?
Yeah. It was something new because I had never been away from home other than, let's say, Kaiser, West Virginia, and Brunswick, Maryland, in that area in my lifetime. And of course, here I was out, and I didn't know nobody or nothing. So anyhow, I was Jubers, and of course, then you would see some of the fellows that was there, and some of the language that they used and so forth. It made you wonder, or did me. And I thought, well, the only thing I can do is try to keep my own nose clean.
Were you a sociable type of kid?
Yes, I was pretty sociable. I mean, talking other than a lot of them, they would talk ball of some kind, which I didn't know nothing about. And well, it's a very, I never played ball and so forth, and let it go. But of course,
how was your drill sergeants and so on in basic training?
What was that?
How was your drill sergeants at basic?
We had a good drill sergeant. Of course, he wanted you to do what things that he wanted done, and I tried to do that. I tried to, if he said, use that bayonet, I tried to do it that way. But I mean, I just used that as an example. And of course, I was lucky in one sense of the word. I didn't have to walk too much. I was riding. And anything that we were supposed to learn to drive, I tried to do my best to do.
What type of equipment did you operate?
Well, the majority of it there in Fort Raleigh, Kansas was half tracks. We had half track training on those, and MH. That was a 6-wheel job like a tank. And of course we had Jeeps, and we had motorcycle. And of course I learned to drive them all.
Did you like one or over another?
Well, I never really cared for the motorcycle, but I did learn to drive it, and of course I did try to pull a fast one time, and I ride the motorcycle. It was old 28 Harley Davises, and they said, now be sure and stay on the path because there's quicksand out here. Of course, it was a shortcut across there. I decided I was going to take a shortcut. 2 of them behind me did the same thing. We hit this quicksand, it would only get down about 12 inches. But motorcycle, it went down. I didn't stay on it. Zoop. But old sergeant, he gave me hell for that. Of course, I was the ringleader of it, and there was 2 behind me. And but we made out all right.
Did you have to fire weapons on the armored cars?
I liked to fire weapons. We had 30 caliber rifles on the firing range, and of course I got a medal for that. But then we fired the 20 millimeter off of there. They'd set that up on a half track, and the 50 caliber. We done all that, and of course that was one thing. When we went overseas, I was in a group that trained the boys that come over there on firing.
So you were a cadre.
Yeah.
You went overseas. What port did you depart from?
Well, I came from Fort Raleigh, Kansas, home on what they call the land route, and I went from there to Blackstone, Virginia, and was there. It wasn't over 3 days, but we shipped out to Newport News and got on the West Point. And went to Le Havre, France.
Had you ever been on the ocean before?
No.
How did it settle with you?
Well, it didn't bother me any. A lot of them got seasick, but it didn't bother me any. Everything went fine as far as.
How long of a ride was that?
Well, we was on the fastest boat. They told us we was on the fastest boat that crossed other than the Queen Mary, and we crossed the ocean in 8 days.
Was it a huge boat, the West Point?
Oh yes, it was a luxury liner. I slept in the swimming pool.
In the swimming pool?
Yeah.
Explain what that means.
All right. It was a luxury liner boat.
Right.
And they converted it over to a troop carrier. Well, the swimming pool was a big pool, but they took water out. Of course, it had the roof over it. And it was enclosed, and you had 4 bunks. And it was in the pool. But of course, there was no water in it. But you had to get down in it to get to the pool. And it was originally a swimming pool. And
Were you on the West Point when you heard the news of the atomic blast?
no,
Where were you when you heard the news of the atomic weapons being used? Early part of August.
to tell you the truth, I can't remember that.
How about VJ Day? Victory in Japan.
Well, I was in Fort Riley, Kansas.
Okay.
That's before I went overseas.
So
I know I was in Junction City. It was approximately 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, evening rather. And then of course I had a pass that was good till midnight that night, and then we had to go back into camp.
was there celebrations when the news?
Oh yes, there was quite a going on, and singing and the shouting and the hollering and so forth. Yeah.
You were still here in the States when it
Oh, yes.
happened, but you're going to be sent to where the war had been.
Yeah.
How'd that make you feel?
Made me feel good, but of course I still thought that I was going to Japan for overseas duty.
Well, you went overseas and you landed Le Havre. How'd they get you to Regansburg?
Well, we had to wait in the harbor for one day. You could look in and see there. And we got off and we got on a train. And they were cattle cars, you might as well say. Actually, it was box cars. They'd only have about 25 to 30 men in them. And of course, they'd pull you a while, and the first thing you know, they'd be pushing you. And I think we was about 4 or 5 days going from Le Havre to Regensburg.
When you got to duty in Germany, were there any dangerous situations that you faced?
No, not really.
No unruly citizens that you had to deal with?
Not really, no. Of course, we had, at first, we had German prisoners would come out and do the work around the barracks and so forth. But I never really had any of them that was real, you know, ruly or anything. It was.
Did you have?
They had all of them though. They were down the Frenchmen.
They didn't like the French.
No, they didn't.
Did you have to arrest anybody during your stay?
Well, oh yeah, you pick up somebody that didn't have a pass or something like that and take them in, and we had one in particular was a SS trooper. We picked him up, of course. You know, you're driving along and there was harvesting. This fellow was on a tractor, and it was in his, I guess July or August, but anyhow, he had a long sleeve shirt on, and he never stopped the tractor or anything. The rest of them stopped and talked, but he didn't. And I said, there's something wrong someplace here. So we checked him out, and of course he finally admitted that he was an SS trooper. We took him in, and they sent him to Regensburg. And he was in the Nuremberg trial. I think he got about a year in prison for it. But he was an SS trooper.
Just before being an SS trooper, they were suspect?
Yeah, the SS troopers, majority of them, well, I don't know what you would call them. They'd do anything and everything. It was cruel. And, but they had their blood, like a O blood, was tattooed in their left arm, in the muscle of the left arm.
You could always tell them by that mark?
And of course, then later on, they would try to discard that and make just a scab, or not a scab, but a place where they'd cut it off or burn it off. But he didn't give us no trouble. He just...
Did you, were you ever sent on a mission to find Nazis who were hiding?
No, I never was. I was just trying to think, though, the only thing that I can't think of the name of the place where they had put these people in shower and put gas on them and buried them.
The concentration camps?
Yeah, that's the concentration camp, yeah, but they killed a lot of them, and then they just buried them with a backhoe and covered them up. And they'd made them take all their clothes off, and they turned the gas on them with the spigots off of the shower heads. I can't never. I was there. I never saw it done or anything, but I was there and where it was at.
How was the smell by the time you arrived there in September?
Oh, there was a bad odor. I don't know how you would, combination of rubber, something like that, I thought. But there was still an odor there. Of course, we stopped there for just a little bit and then went on, but they showed us where the graves, not graves, but they had dug the pit and buried them. Of course, I guess they had took them out of there then, and they're part of them when I was there.
How much destruction of the city still remained by the time you got there?
Well, that was one thing that was amazing to me. There'd be a nice big church. Everything would be flat around the church. I gotta say this, I never saw one church that was destroyed. Buildings all around them and everything else, but I never saw. Now, I wouldn't doubt that there wasn't some place that one of them got blown up, but the majority of them, there was never a church.
Were you ever stationed at Nuremberg where the trials were being held?
No, I was never stationed there, but I stayed there on leave for about 4 days one time.
Did you go and see where the big Nuremberg rallies were being held before the war?
I was there and saw one day they was having trials, and I was there and saw the trial. Went in and sat there and watched them for 2 or 3 hours.
What brought your service to an end?
Well, they was shipping anyone that was drafted home. And of course I wanted to come home, and then they was trying to get all volunteer Army over there. That's the reason. And of course I wouldn't sign up they wanted me to sign up, and I'd have been promoted to staff sergeant.
From private to staff sergeant?
Yeah, if I would sign up. And I wouldn't sign up because they told us when I went in the service that if I went in and stayed there, I wouldn't have my job on the railroad when I come out. That's one reason I didn't sign up. Of course, now I wish I would have, because I could have held my seniority.
So, how did you get back to the States?
Well, I went to Barmahaven. We were stationed on the outside of Regansburg. I can't think of the name of it, but anyhow, we went to Barmahaven, Germany, and come back on a boat to George Washington. It was about 14 days coming back. Come down through the English Channel, and of course it was a nice day when we come down there, and you could see the coast of England and the coast of France.
No problems going back home.
And we come into, I guess, New York, yeah. And then went by train from there to Fort Meade, or not Meade. Yeah, Fort Meade, Maryland. There's where I was discharged from. Of course, I had 30 days, I think it was 30 days furlough coming to me.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, it did, to a certain extent. It makes me feel towards anyone that enlists or drafted, or of course there's no such thing as a draft right now, but whenever they put that uniform on, it makes me feel good to see them trying to protect our country. It makes me feel good to think, and they don't know what's going to happen from day to day in the service, especially with servicemen today. You never hear one of them complain, or at least I haven't, about protecting us at home.
The Army in Iraq today is doing very much the same thing your mission was in World War II.
That is true.
What do you think that they're doing that you didn't have to deal with?
Well, what I didn't have to deal with was, we had, when I say we, the service, and they took all of their weapons and everything away from them. And there wasn't someone sneaking something into them. Where I think in Iraq today, we have too much stuff that they can get a hold of is being shipped into them unbeknownst. Now, when I was in the service in Germany, we knowed everything was coming in and out.
There was no insurgency during your time? No bombs going off or terrorism?
No, I can't. There wasn't when I was there. Now, of course, when, for example, like I say, we pulled raids. We raided a bunch of boats on the Danube River, right out of Regensburg. We raided them one night, especially to find out whether they was black marketing or they had weapons of any kind. And of course, if you saw an old rusty up gun, you took it away from them. And where today they don't have, they have stuff all over the place.
You never came across resistance then when you found...
No, I never did.
Did you find any heavy weapons then?
No, I never. Now I've had hand grenades and rifles. The biggest thing that I've ever found was a 50 caliber machine gun. We did find it, but it was just laying over in the back in the room, and of course there was no ammunition or anything there, but it was.
You guys shipped home before without points. A lot of people had points
Okay,
they had to deal with.
I had 3 points.
3 points. What were they coming from? What points?
Right? Points was a point for every month you was in there before they started. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but they started to ship you home. If you had every month was a point, you was there, and if you had 30, I think it was 30 or 36 points, they shipped you home right now. And of course, then as they went down the line, they shipped you according to the points you had. And of course, when I come home, what I mean, there was very few of them that had points. Just the same way with me.
I'd like to thank you for our interview today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we're done?
No?
I'd like to ask you about your veterans organizations. Did you ever join any of them?
I belong to the American Legion, so
Are you active with them?
no, I'm not. No, I belong to, in fact, I've belonged to the American Legion, well, I'd say for 50 years. But the last time I joined in West Virginia, of course I've lived in Maryland now for 54 years, but I'm joined over in Ridgely, and I've never been, well, no, I'll take that back. I was in the post one time. I pay my dues. Of course, that's another thing. West Virginia paid a bonus for the servicemen. Of course, I went in the service in West Virginia. I applied for mine, which I think was about $5 a month. But that's beside the point. They told me I wasn't in during the war. So I said, forget it. And I never said anything more.
The World War II memorial has been placed up only in the last few years. It took so long to get that memorial built. How was your feelings toward that?
Well, I think it's great myself. Of course, I know in years to come there'll be a lot of the younger people and the older people will think, well, it's great. I think it's great. They started one where I was born and raised in Morgan County. They started one there. Of course, I've contributed to it, and I will more than likely contribute some more because I think it's good. And at least you're honoring the ones that are trying to make us free.
How would you compare your war with other wars we've fought since?
Well, truthfully, I couldn't say because I think that the wars is something else, and of course now that we have younger boys that they'll take more for granted out here than they did years ago because you have so much technical stuff and they go by that rather than looking at it your way as just like you look down the road here and you see a car coming. Well, they'll grab a machine and tell you exactly how many feet. Where back in our war, you had to judge it by your distance. And I think it's a different thing, but the world's changed too.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
I really think it partially has changed for the best.
Thank you, Mr. Foreback.